And what type of insurance do you have, ma'am?
None.
Okay. Do you have medical assistance?
Yeah.
We have her on a monitor showing a normal sinus rhythm. We have her on O2. Our blood pressure 180 over 98.
Yeah, okay, you've got her referral. We'll send her back with that. Maybe we should just kind of put this in red so they notice it. Esther, we're going to be you're going to be going back to the nursing home, okay?
How much did you spend last year?
$28,000 medical.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for the opportunity to be here with you today. I want to begin by expressing all of our collective appreciation to the Park Nicholas Medical Center for being our host and hostess this morning for this, what I believe someone will someday characterize as an historic event. We are here today to educate ourselves on how to avert an impending catastrophe in the American healthcare system. I only regret that the health of our esteemed chairman, Congressman Claude Pepper, keeps him, who is responsible for the existence of this commission, from being here with us today, because I know how much he would have loved being part of this particular moment in history. Let there be no doubt, the problems are severe. A national responsibility to millions of Americans of astronomical size and consequence to our federal budget. The formation of the Bipartisan Commission on Comprehensive Health Care is an unusual and an exciting coalition of primarily congressional leaders committed to rectifying the inequities in the availability and financing of health benefits in the United States. Unlike other commissions, this one has the power to actually act on what it recommends. If we are a civilized society, and I believe that we are, then we must rectify the shortcomings in the current healthcare delivery system that limit or prevent access of all people in the United States to comprehensive health care, and we must do it immediately. The honor of being the first person to testify before the U.S. Bipartisan Commission on Comprehensive Health Care goes to Diane Seeger.
My name is Diana Seeger. I live in Grand Rapids, Minnesota with my 4 children. My children's ages are 20, 16, 5, and 3. My first 2 children were raised without our having any medical insurance. 6 years ago, I was pregnant with my 3rd child. My husband, Melvin, was working as a logger, bringing home about $9,000 a year. I was not employed, we had no health insurance, and our assets were too great for us to qualify for medical assistance. So I regularly drove 70 miles to the Indian Hospital in Cass Lake, Minnesota, so that I could receive prenatal care. We knew that when the time came, we would have to go 84 miles, 14 miles farther, to a hospital in Bemidji, Minnesota, because the Indian Hospital did not do deliveries. There were 2 hospitals within 20 minutes of our house, but the costs were way out of our range. Well, when the time came and we were en route to the hospital, we did not make it. 25 miles into the trip, I went into labor, and we wound up at an Indian out clinic. They were not equipped to handle deliveries. They had no forceps. They didn't even have any oxygen. The doctor at the clinic called the ambulance from a hospital that was 5 miles away, one which we had just passed. The ambulance came quickly, but not quick enough. By the time David was delivered, our baby had been deprived of oxygen from 8 to 10 minutes of his life. As a result, he was severely brain damaged. Shortly after the last surgery, when David was 3.5 years old, he died. Had we had health insurance or been eligible for medical assistance, we could have gone to a hospital that was closer, and David would be alive today. The bitter irony of this all is once he was handicapped, David had all the medical care that he needed. The cost of his care for his short life was $183,000, all of which was paid by medical assistance.
Our next witness is Sue Stevens, whose home is in St. Louis Park, Minnesota, and Sue is a single parent with a 12-year-old daughter who has chronic health problems. Sue, thank you for being with me.
Jennifer suffers from allergies and asthma, and I have the allergies, asthma, and high blood pressure. So my employer's regular insurance carrier will not take us on. We checked with other insurance companies with HMOs, and nobody will cover us because of our pre-existing health problems. For a while, we were going without our medications because we couldn't afford them. Between the two of us, the prescriptions run close to $200 a month. I make $6 an hour, and it's tough fitting $200 a month medications into our budget. I've worked hard to make a good life for Jennifer and myself, but I don't know how long I can go on having to worry each day whether our next health problem is going to drag us under completely.
How difficult it is to live with a system that doesn't recognize that if you paid a little money up front, you'd save an awful lot of money somewhere else. Now, a person who's been instructive on this for all of us in Minnesota for even more years than she appears to have lived is Grace Nelson of Edina, who is a member of the Board of Directors of the Minnesota Board of Aging, Group Health, and the Medicare Advocacy Project, a past president of the Minnesota Senior Federation, and a past vice president of the Metropolitan Senior Federation.
The bottom line tends to be cost, not quality. No money, no care, little help for chronic care, screening out individuals with expensive care problems, and a lack of attention to long-term care.
Floyd Weiss is a 75-year-old with a 24-hour-a-day job, which he's going to describe for us right now.
And my wife, Dina, now has Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's with other complications setting in. She needs 24 hours a day care. My children do help as much as they can, but are all busy working and taking care of their own families, and I understand that. When there is an emergency, they are always there to help me. In my place there where I'm keeping my wife at home, I could use some help through some type of insurance. We only have Medicare at the present time. We had a good HMO, but our clinic had to discontinue because they were falling behind too much with funds. And that would help me an awful lot if they had some help through that. Now, the new insurance that they come out with this year, I have looked it over, and of course it's always next year and next year and next year. And I think by the time they get to where I am, probably we'll be gone. I would like to have something in there that helps me, and so far the way it is, I can't see anything down the road for the next year or so. It will be more costly for us, that it will be. And I also agree very much with Grace Nelson. I could go on, but she has said an awful lot in there that I would like to say, so take your next man here.
Thank you, Floyd, very much. Our next witness is Reverend Joe Head, who is a retired minister, one of the leaders of the Liberty Bell Foundation. He has been disabled since 1983 following a bus accident. His wife also has a disability.
With my wife's bedridden condition and me confined to this wheelchair, maintaining ourselves and our home is not easy. We can't drive, so we can't leave the house for any reason on our own. Our physical limitations make housekeeping and home maintenance almost impossible. We've been together for many years, and We have relied on each other. We still depend on each other, but that's not now enough. We need help to stay together in our own home. We love this country and we've always done our part. But now here we are helpless and not getting all we need.
Our final witness, Mr. and Mrs. Bob Oakland from Duluth, and I guess, Bob, you're going to have a statement about your commitment and your wife's commitment to your 75-year-old father.
I have been taking care of my father for the past 6 years. He is in general poor health. He was recently diagnosed with cancer, has severe emphysema, arthritis, poor eyesight, hearing loss, and war wounds which have left him partially disabled. I've been taking care of my father for 6 years now. During that time, he's lived with me, and I've done what I can to see to it that his needs are met. Not long ago, I remarried Betty, and I have tried to maintain a normal family life for our children, but it's been hard. Since Betty and I were married 2.5 years ago, much of the burden of caring for my father comes or falls on her. She does the best she can to hold everything together. We have a 17-month-old baby, and for Betty, caring for the baby and caring for my father are pretty much the same. I don't know what things will be like when my dad's condition gets worse. His care will use up more and more of our time and our resources, just as our older children become teenagers, a time when their demands on our time and money will also grow. My family and marriage already show strains at times, due to the caring for my father and his demands. And I don't know what's going to happen when things get worse. I just don't know.
Thank you.
But overwhelmingly, those without health insurance, access to health care in our state of Minnesota are working men and women and their dependents, their children. And what does that mean? It means that when they end up in the system, they end up at the tail end of the system. They end up in hospitals rather than doctors' offices. They end up with injections rather than pills. Once they enter the hospital, those without health insurance are between 2 and 3 times more likely to die in that hospital, as are the rest of us that have health insurance. If there are 400,000 Minnesotans without access to care today, we know that there will be 440,000 next year at this time and 500,000 the year after that. And while we may not be amongst them, our children may be, or our parents may be, or we may be laid off of our employment, and we may be in those same lines.
That the level of poverty in rural America is increasing quite dramatically. It's not going down, it's getting a lot worse. And a matter of fact, the degree of poverty in rural America is 50% greater than it is in urban America. Poverty is not in the South Bronx. It's not in Washington, D.C. It's in rural Minnesota, it's in Iowa, it's in West Virginia, and it's in Northern California. It's in all the rural places of this nation, and we need to recognize that. Rural America has some unique problems in that it is very difficult for people who reside in rural America often to gain access to the insurance system. They're self-employed. They cannot take part in employer programs in many cases. And as a result, the cost that they have to bear related to health care is substantially higher than some of their urban counterparts.
Now our next witness will be Luann Nyberg of the Minnesota Children's Defense Fund.
Well, I was thinking as I drove over here about how to characterize what's going on in our country. And I think these are the 2 words that characterize them. The first one is wrong, and the second one is stupid. What is it going to take? I hope it doesn't take us all racing down into the government plaza in downtown Minneapolis or something like that, but I began to wonder, and then I said to myself, well, they seem to be ready to do this S&L bailout, and it seems to me that this health care problem is just as big as that.
If the chair of this commission were here today, Congressman Pepper, he would tell you that this is the if not us who, if not now when commission. We're going to try to find in some of Minnesota's experiences some clues. Begin with the past chairman of the Board of Trustees of the American Hospital Association and the president of Health One, Mr. John Wegman.
Thank you, Senator.
It's my belief that the average insured American uses more services than necessary for good health, and that an important cause, not the only cause, but an important cause of that excessive utilization, especially for outpatient services, is the richness of the benefit structure of most insurance packages. Now, I don't know who the original architects of health insurance were, but I suspect they'd be shocked to find out that the same premium dollars they had originally intended to use for care for pneumonia, childhood meningitis, broken hips, and cancer surgery are now being stretched to provide care for warts, baldness, breast reductions, chiropractic therapy to improve one's tennis game, not to mention numerous unnecessary lab and x-ray tests, which are reasonably and persistently requested by informed patients who say, I saw a program on TV which said I should have this test and I'm entitled to it because my insurance pays for it. I'm confident, however, that if presented with the choice between basic and necessary care for all Americans and millions of Americans not even getting the bare minimum care because others enjoy an abundant set of benefits, Americans will be big-hearted enough to make the tough decisions.
I am the executive director of a coalition that consists of 55 relatively large corporate and public sector employers, as well as 15 labor unions, and hospitals, physicians, HMOs, and health insurers. Our organization was founded in 1980 with a primary mission of promoting well-functioning competitive market in healthcare in Minnesota. It's still an open question whether competition will produce forces strong enough to balance the pressure of rapidly expanding technology. I do know that Minnesota, in spite of these questions, has not given up, and that its employers, employees, providers, and plans are all working very hard to make the market work.
The problem we have in the smaller employer and individual market is that the individual has to make an economic choice about whether he will spend the money or not spend the money for health care. If he is in very good shape, he won't spend the money, therefore he's not insured. If he gets sick, he has no insurance coverage. My problem is that I cause problems for Don. I'm the one trying to estimate what the costs are, not who's going to pay them. And it's a very difficult problem.
Our final witness on this panel is Sheila Leatherman.
It is necessary to make explicit the cost for all. That is, to remove cost subsidization or excessive risk assumption. Reimbursement must be fair and predictable to providers and also must avoid inequitable geographic variation. Regarding access, there must be consensus around a level of services that is based on improving the health status of a population. Regarding quality, until we can better define appropriate care, it is impossible to set meaningful standards for access or to devise prudent reimbursement methods. In short, I do believe that managed care concepts and the experience may be instructive for planning an efficient healthcare system that provides universal access for all.
Where we once looked exclusively to Washington for answers, states are now providing some of their own solutions. State initiatives in such areas as welfare reform, parental leave, and health care for the uninsured, including the proposal you heard discussed earlier today, have spread from state to state and have become the basis for national policy debates, and I think that will continue to be true as well in the long-term care area.
Indeed, I think we need more dialogue about what it is that people really want, because as we begin to talk about those things, it turns out there's much more consensus than we ever really expected existed. We can, in fact, begin to pay more for better care. We can, in fact, begin to really match our desire for better quality with our willingness to pay for it. And at the same time, we need to be willing to pay less for poor care and to do something about improving those people by either taking them out of the marketplace or making some very dramatic changes in their behavior.
It is only through a universal social insurance approach that the risk of long-term care can be pooled across the entire population and per capita costs minimized. It's only through this approach that administrative and marketing costs can be tamed, and the vast majority of resources be allocated to direct services. It's only through a public program that we can avoid a two-tiered system that discriminates against the poor and sick while providing much greater benefits to the economically advantaged. While we debate the merits of public versus private financing of long-term care, millions of elderly are currently at risk of impoverishment and unsuitable care because of a failing long-term care financing system. The needs of those elderly cannot be set aside by ignoring the need for an improved public system. Thank you.
The Aiken County Board of Commissioners endorsed in 1984 the formation of a task force to plan for improvements to the existing long-term care service system. Winona County in 1985, the county commissioners also formed a task force which consisted of many of the same providers as well as representatives and community leaders. They addressed the issue of the needs of the frail elderly in their community. Communities and county government are like the elderly individuals. They want to be able to care for their citizens. They, like the individual, need assistance for that to occur.
I'd urge the Commission not to be timid. I think various surveys that have been looked at, a recent one by the Villers Foundation showed that by a 5-2 margin, respondents expressed a willingness to tax themselves or to pay in some other way for long-term care services. One of the few needs in this country that people have stepped forward and said they're willing to make a commitment to fund. And so I would, again, urge the Commission and members of Congress, when they receive your report, to take action, as someone suggested earlier, and to make the commitment to an aggressive program for the future. Thank you.
In 1987, Medicare utilization in Minnesota accounted for less than 1% of all resident days. In 1988, that figure grew to 3%, and by 1991, we expect total resident days covered by Medicare to be 16% of resident days in Minnesota. These improvements can be traced largely to the improved coverage guidelines, but also to the Catastrophic Health Care Act. This is great news for consumers, and savings also accrue to state Medicaid budgets. We do have a significant problem to work out on behalf of providers in Minnesota that's caused by a lack of interaction between the federal Medicare program and our state Medicaid program. But the thought I'd like to leave you with is this, that as the federal government gets the bill for these increased services under Medicare, I do hope we won't see an erosion of the progress that we have made to this point. Rather, I hope that we might be able to create the kind of momentum needed to develop a restructured Medicare program that would embrace the full range of long-term care services in the kind of social insurance approach described by Grace Nelson.
I'd like to offer 3 overall recommendations. 1, the focus of policy planning needs to shift from issues of long-term care to issues of chronic impairment. 2, new comprehensive national policy is needed to guide program activity across the spectrum of public and private financing for the chronically impaired elderly. And 3, a long-range strategy of healthcare reform for the chronically impaired is needed to sequentially prepare for the newly emerging problems of the 21st century. That it seems extremely important that as we approach an umbrella policy, that this full spectrum of care be taken into account, all of the financing, public programs be looked at as part of a single kind of policy strategy, and that we look at how care is provided and needed in a natural way and not simply how it's currently structured.
I know it's not the beginning of anyone's participation. All of you who have come to this hearing have been at these hearings before or at other hearings, or we would not be having this commission and we would not be having this commission hearing. As I said in my opening statement, we have eliminated some important gaps in protection of elderly and disabled persons in America, but the most difficult problems remain. If we are a civilized nation, and we all believe we are, although that's been challenged here today by a number of the witnesses, then we must rectify the shortcomings in the current healthcare delivery system that limit or prevent access of all persons in the United States to comprehensive health care. It is the pledge of this commission and its 15 members that by November 9th of 1989, we will have a report and recommendations to all of you and to all Americans on how that is to be accomplished.